The chandeliers above the reception hall glowed like captured stars, their light spilling across white linens and polished silver. I had just finished my toast, my voice trembling with pride as I spoke of Celeste in her lace gown, when Evelina Harrow rose from her seat. Her champagne glass caught the light, and her smile was as sharp as broken glass. "Marjorie," she said clearly, her words slicing through the music and laughter, "isn't it time you handed over the keys to your farm? After all, it belongs with the newlyweds now." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Then she set her glass down and pulled a slim folder from her handbag. "Celeste has already agreed. It's what any loving mother would do." She opened the folder, spreading photocopied documents across the tablecloth. Gasps rippled through the hall as heads turned toward me. 200 guests' neighbors, friends. Strangers from Rowan's side stared as though waiting for me to surrender. I could see Celeste at the head table, her face pale, lips parted as if to speak. But no sound came. My daughter, the one I raised on this land, the one I worked myself raw for, sat frozen. The sting of Evelina's triumph pressed deeper as she tilted her head. "She gets confused sometimes," she said sweetly to the room. "At her age, it's only natural." A murmur began, low and spreading. The ugly word whispered between tables, "senile." Heat rose in my chest. My hand went to my handbag where the real keys rested. Cold metal biting my palm through the leather. They were not hers to claim. They were not Celeste's to promise. They were the last proof of all I had endured, of a lifetime spent keeping that land alive. I shook my head, steady though my heart pounded. "No," I said, my voice carrying further than I expected. The hall went quiet. The music silenced. The air waited with disbelief, and in that stillness, as Evelina's smile deepened and Celeste's silence cut like a blade, I realized this battle had been set long before the wedding day. The morning of the wedding still lingers in my mind, bright and cruel in its innocence. Celeste stood before the mirror in the lace gown that once belonged to my mother. The gown carried the weight of memory threads worn soft by time, hems stitched by hands long gone. Seeing her in it made my chest swell with pride. She was radiant, and for a fleeting moment I let myself believe the day would belong only to joy. But even as I pinned her veil and smoothed her shoulders, unease lingered like a shadow in the room. Evelina Harrow had been circling for months, her words sweetened with poison. "That land is too much for you, dear," she would murmur at luncheons, patting my arm as if offering comfort. Celeste and Rowan should secure their future now, while they're young enough to build on it. Each phrase seemed harmless alone, but together they spun a web. I remembered one afternoon especially. She placed her manicured hand over mine, her rings cool against my skin, and whispered, "Don't be stubborn when the time comes." Her eyes didn't smile. I thought then she meant the day I would one day leave this earth. I see now she was speaking of this very day, the wedding, the moment she chose to strike, the stage she had been arranging all along. The cruelty at the reception wasn't born in anger. It was rehearsed, choreographed to humiliate me with witnesses. That knowledge cut deeper than the laughter, deeper than the whispers of senility. It meant that Evelina had planned to strip me of dignity in front of my daughter, and Celeste, whether from fear or complicity, had allowed the silence to stand. As I sat in the quiet after the celebration, the echoes of champagne glasses and whispered doubts fading, the truth settled heavily in my chest. Nothing about this had been sudden. It had all been waiting, just beyond the vows. And as I looked out over the fields the next morning, the farm still mine beneath the wide Texas sky, I felt the old ache of sacrifice stirring, demanding to be remembered. I drove back to Bastrop County that night, the the satin and glitter of the reception still clinging to my clothes, the echo of Evelina's voice clattering in my skull. When I pulled into the long gravel drive, the farm rose in the moonlight like a faithful friend, oak trees casting shadows. The rust-red barns standing as they always had, the fields stretching quiet beneath the Texas sky. I stepped out of the truck and breathed in the smell of hay and soil. No chandeliers here, only the honest hum of crickets. I walked the fence line with a lantern, my hand brushing the rough posts. Every board told a story. I remembered Celeste running barefoot through the tall grass, chasing fireflies with her jar glowing in the dusk. I remembered the long nights after her father died, me working double shifts at the diner, then coming home to patch fences by lantern light. Winters when I chose a thinner blanket so I could pay the mortgage, the wood stove sputtering as I kept her warm with everything I had left to give. This farm is not just soil. It is sacrifice pressed into earth, years of survival stitched into every acre. It is the proof that I endured. To give it away would not just be losing land, it would be erasing myself. And yet, Evelina's words followed me even here. Too old, too confused. The poison of them seeped under my skin, and for the first time I felt the tremor of doubt. What if she had managed to convince Celeste of that? What if my own daughter believed I was fading, clinging to a place I could no longer manage? I tightened my grip on the lantern handle, its metal hot against my palm. The farm stood steady around me, but inside, a storm was building. I knew Evelina would not stop with one public scene. She would come again, and this time, she might bring my daughter with her. Celeste came to the farm 3 days later, the morning sun slanting across the porch as she stepped out of Rowan's truck. She carried herself differently now, shoulders straighter, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Instead, she twisted her new wedding ring, the gold catching the light in nervous circles. We sat at the kitchen table where I had served her countless breakfasts, and the silence stretched until I could no longer bear it. "Say what you came to say," I told her, folding my hands to keep them steady. She drew a breath. "Mom, Evelina gave me some papers before the wedding. She said it was just for tax purposes, to make sure everything was in order for the future." Her voice wavered, and still she couldn't look at me. I signed them without really reading. I thought it was nothing. The words struck harder than Evelina's insults ever could. My daughter's hand, my daughter's name, had given that woman leverage. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, as if everything I had protected all these years could vanish with the scratch of her pen. Celeste reached across the table, but stopped short, as if unsure of her right to comfort me. It was innocent. I swear, I never meant innocent. My voice cracked sharper than I intended. "Do you know what she's trying to do?" Celeste flinched. She thinks you shouldn't be carrying all this alone. You're tired. Mom, you forget things sometimes." Her words cut like a blade, not because they came from Evelina, but because they carried my daughter's voice. The seeds Evelina planted had taken root. Celeste sounded less like herself and more like her mother-in-law, each word chipping away at the faith I thought unshakable. I sat back, my chest heavy. The betrayal wasn't distant anymore. It was sitting across from me, wearing my daughter's face, twisting her wedding ring while my world trembled. And when she finally left, her truck pulling down the gravel drive, the silence she left behind felt louder than any accusation. It followed me as I stepped outside and heard the whispers already drifting through town. At the feed store, I felt it first. 2 men by the counter lowered their voices when I walked in, their glances sliding over me with something between pity and suspicion. One muttered, "She can't run that place anymore," as if I'd gone deaf along with old age. I kept my head high as I paid for grain, but the words clung to me like burrs. At the church potluck the next Sunday, the whispers grew bolder. Women who once sought out my pecan pie now offered me soft smiles, the kind reserved for someone whose mind is slipping. I heard Evelina's name mentioned between folded napkins and tilted heads. Her stories had spread quickly, dressed as concern but sharpened into knives. By the time the charity luncheon arrived, I had no doubt whose hand was behind it all. Evelina sat near the front, pearls gleaming at her throat, laughing lightly with the mayor's wife. When I approached, she turned that practiced smile on me. "Marjorie," she said sweetly, "I only worry for Celeste's future. She deserves stability. Don't you think her voice carried just enough to be overheard by the table nearby?" I leaned in closer, lowering mine. "You've said enough." Her expression didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. "Oh, I've only just begun," she hissed, so soft only I could hear. "Soon, no one will believe a word you say." The weight of her confidence pressed down on me. This wasn't only about deeds and papers. It was about reputation, about isolating me until my own neighbors doubted my voice. She was building a cage out of gossip, and if I didn't act soon, I'd be locked inside it. I returned home that evening with the hum of those whispers still in my ears, their echo louder than the cicadas in the fields. But in the quiet of my kitchen, I pulled out the old lockbox from the cabinet. Evelina had her words. I would need something stronger. The lockbox gave me nothing but old bills and faded photographs. So I drove into town and climbed the creaking steps to Mr. Calder's law office. He had been my late husband's attorney, a man with a memory as sharp as the creases in his worn suits. When I explained what Evelina was doing, his brow furrowed, and he disappeared into the back room. He returned with a stack of dusty files, tied with twine. "Your husband trusted me with more than just your deeds," he said, sliding the papers across his desk. As I loosened the string, the smell of old paper rose, and with it, the truth. Evelina's family, the proud Harrows, were drowning in debt. Loans unpaid, mortgages leveraged, investments collapsed. The grand houses, the country club dinners, the expensive suits Rowan wore. None of it was solid. It was a facade propped up by credit, and the creditors were closing in like vultures. "She doesn't want your farm for sentiment," Calder said, his voice low. "She wants collateral. Your land is the only thing stable enough to save her empire." I sat back, the weight of it sinking in. Evelina wasn't simply cruel, she was cornered. Every barb, every whisper, every public strike had been aimed at survival. For a moment, pity stirred in me, but just as quickly, it hardened into something else. Desperation explained her actions, but it did not excuse them. I folded the papers neatly and tucked them into my bag. If Evelina wanted a war over my farm, I finally had the weapon to fight back. And as I stepped out into the afternoon sun, I knew the battle would no longer be fought in whispers. It would be fought face to face. When I returned from Mr. Calder's office, I found Celeste waiting on the porch, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She didn't hug me when I climbed the steps. Instead, she frowned and said, "Mom, we need to talk." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once braided her hair before school. Her eyes searched mine, hesitant but firm. "Rowan told me you left the south gate open again. The cattle could have wandered. And last week, you misplaced the feed invoices you don't even remember. Do you?" The words landed heavy, not because they were true, but because she believed them. My throat tightened. "Celeste, that gate chain has been rusting for years. It slips unless you double loop it. And those invoices, I filed them in the ledger like I always do." She shook her head slowly, like I was a child refusing to admit a mistake. "Mom, you've been forgetting things." Evelina thinks she stopped herself, but the damage was already done. Evelina's voice was in my daughter's mouth again. The pain was worse than Evelina's public cruelty. My own child, the one I had sacrificed winters and wages for, was now looking at me with doubt, not pity, not compassion, but suspicion. I rose from the table without another word and went to the study. From the shelves, I pulled the leather-bound journals where I'd logged every season's planting, every calf born, every dollar spent. I laid them out in front of her, page after page of tidy handwriting, receipts paper-clipped to margins, dates checked and rechecked. Read them, I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled. I am not slipping. Celeste, I have held this place together with more order than your Evelina ever dreamed of. She didn't answer right away, her fingers brushing the pages but her eyes fixed on the floor. Silence pressed between us, heavier than any storm, and in that silence, I knew the time for quiet defense was over. If Evelina wanted to poison the town, then I would meet her where everyone could see. The notice came folded in Celeste's handwriting, but the words weren't hers. Evelina had called for a community discussion at the town hall, framed as concern for my future. I knew it was a trap, but I went anyway. If she wanted an audience, I would give her one. The hall was packed with neighbors, church members, and business owners. Evelina stood at the front, pearls gleaming, her voice carrying easily. "We all care about Marjorie," she said, smiling as though I were her sister, "but the farm is too large a burden for her now. Wouldn't it be better if it served the younger generation?" She lifted the papers, Celeste's signature clear under the harsh lights. A few murmurs rose. Heads turned toward me, expectant, almost pitying. I stood slowly, my knees steady despite the years. "You speak of burden," I said, my voice filling the room, "but you carry more than you admit." From my bag, I drew the folder Mr. Calder had given me. "Evelina Harrow's estate is drowning in debt. Her fortune is smoke and mirrors. She wants my farm not to save my daughter's future, but her own." Gasps echoed through the hall. Evelina's face froze, then cracked under the weight of so many eyes. For once, she had no sweet answer, but as the crowd turned on her, I heard another sound. My daughter's sob. Celeste stood near the back, her face crumpled, tears spilling. "I didn't know," she whispered. Though the words were swallowed by the rising voices, the judgment in the room was no longer reserved for Evelina. It reached Celeste, too, caught between two mothers, one who had lied and one who had raised her. I gathered the papers back into my bag, the room buzzing around me, and knew the fight was not yet over. The night after the meeting, I couldn't sleep. The voices from the hall still circled in my head, gasps, whispers, the sound of my daughter's tears. I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, dust rising with every step, and opened the cedar trunk that had held our family's keepsakes for decades. Inside were photo albums, brittle letters, and a bundle of documents tied with twine. My hands shook as I untied them, and there, tucked in an envelope yellowed with age, I found his handwriting. My husband had left a revised deed, signed and witnessed, granting full legal authority to me alone. At the bottom, in his careful script, he had written, "The farm must never be used to settle another family's debts." Tears blurred the ink. He had known, even then, how fragile legacy could be, how quickly outsiders might try to take what we had built. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling his presence in every line. This was my trump card. Evelina could wave her papers until her hands shook, but Celeste's signature had no power over what was never hers to give away. The farm was mine, in law and in love, and no amount of gossip could undo that truth. I placed the deed carefully into a folder, sealing it as though it were armor. The time for whispers was over. If Evelina wanted a stage, I would bring the final act. And this time, Celeste would stand with us. Forced to see where loyalty belonged, I turned out the attic light, the envelope safe under my arm, and felt something I hadn't in months' certainty: tomorrow. The battle would end on my terms. The day of reckoning came in the courthouse, not in a hall or a church. Evelina arrived draped in her pearls, but the shine had dulled, her shoulders rigid under the stares of neighbors who once sought her approval. I handed the revised deed to the judge, my husband's words preserved in ink, and the matter ended swiftly. What Celeste had signed carried no weight. Evelina's papers dissolved into nothing more than evidence of her desperation. The creditors pounced soon after. News spread of foreclosures, lawsuits, and accounts frozen. Evelina's empire, built on appearance and charm, collapsed like wet paper. By the month's end, she was gone from Bastrop, her name spoken in lowered tones, not with reverence but with relief. Celeste came to me then, her face streaked with shame. I didn't see it. Mom. I wanted to believe her. Can you forgive me? The ache in her voice was real. But I didn't open my arms right away. Forgiveness, like the land, required labor, so I put her to work. She mended fences, dug post holes, and rose before dawn to feed cattle. Her hands blistered, her back ached, but she did not complain. Day by day, she shed the softness Evelina had dressed her in and found a rhythm in the soil. When we worked side by side, sweat on our brows, I began to see her not as a child seeking inheritance, but as a woman learning the worth of what she almost lost. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the silence between us filled again, not with doubt, but with trust. Evelina was nothing more than a shadow that had passed over us. One evening, I sat on the farmhouse porch, the sun bleeding into the horizon. The keys lay warm in my lap, heavy not with fear but with history. I whispered into the settling dusk. They thought age made me weak, but respect isn't inherited, it's earned. The cicadas sang. The field stretched steady and wide, and I knew the farm and my dignity were mine again.